Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. And 3 days in football is a very long time. On Sunday night, I sat alongside Tom Barkley from the Times and Marcus Buckland. I was elated. We'd just beaten Everton by 3-0 at Goodison Park. Spurs have gone third in the Premier League. And here we are, a Wednesday night, and I doff my cap to all those Spurs fans who've travelled to Newcastle and somehow have got to find a way back home after a 2-0 defeat. And I mean, I'm intrigued actually to get Tom's reaction, almost an impartial reaction, though we can't hide the fact, Tom, you're a Newcastle fan. So, mate, congratulations. You're through to the next round of the Mickey Mouse competition. And in all honesty, I think we kind of feared the worst. I'm finding it hard to fully assess the Tottenham performance because there were flowing moments, there were opportunities, but there's this extraordinary lack of bite in front of goal. And unfortunately, as creative as Jed Spence might be, and I thought he had a really good game tonight. I mean, Kudus came on towards the end. We have moments, we created openings, but I never feel as though Spurs or a Spurs player is going to get on the end of one of those. And as a result, in the end, it was a very comfortable night for the holders. They go through to the quarterfinals. What's your take on that 90 minutes?
Yeah, hi, Marcus. It's funny, if you look at the statistics, it looks like Spurs weren't far off it, shots on target, possession. But to be honest, that a lot of those chances came on after they conceded, and obviously they conceded the second goal pretty early into the second half. So it was a classic case of it was on them to make things happen, wasn't it? And they had a few chances, and Richarlison, who I'm sure we'll come on to in a minute, should have done better in moments, but I still think Newcastle were pretty comfortable. And this is a pretty strong Newcastle team, albeit not completely their first choice one, against a Spurs team that is much changed. Injuries are biting again. The latest one to fall to injury today is Archie Gray, calf injury. I'm told hopefully 4 weeks, but others are reporting, could be more than that. Just for a bit of context, my understanding is that he picked that up. He first felt it in the Monaco game, and then also in the warm-up against Everton, and then went for a scan, I think, on Monday, and that's what's led to him being out. When this was one of those games where he might well have played, actually, particularly with all the injuries. And Van de Ven gets rested, doesn't he? Presumably, hopefully rested, because of having to wrap him in cotton wool. So Paulini is playing at centre-back, who I thought actually acquitted himself pretty well. He always seems to, doesn't he, Paulini, wherever he's playing. But nonetheless, underlined how much they were sort of not playing their first choice 11 or even close to it, particularly at the back. And it was pretty limp, to be honest. Spurs, I watched the game and I saw them line up in their yellow shirts, and I instantly thought back to Newcastle 7, Spurs 1 back in the 90s when Shearer scored twice. I'm sure Spurs have been back in yellow before and probably won through Harry Kane, I imagine, at some point. But it obviously was nothing like that. But Newcastle, I suppose had their moments, but I think it was a fair result, even though the first goal, which was obviously pretty crucial, I imagine quite a few Spurs fans will take issue with it, and if we're not going to discuss it now, I'm sure we'll come on to it in a minute.
No. Well, let's discuss it now, Tom. First of all, let me say also, if we didn't have to go to Newcastle for the next 20 years, I would be thrilled, because it's a horror story whenever we go to that part of the world at the moment. And I concur with what you're saying. Newcastle looked pretty comfortable, and Spurs may have had, in terms of shots on target and opportunities, a reasonable share of the spoils, but that does not really tell the whole story. However, that first goal, now when I'm initially watching it, I'm shouting at Jed Spence and saying, "Man, what are you doing? Sort your boots out, get back into that central position." And then when you get the benefit of the analysis at halftime, you realise that his boot was taken off his foot. And to be fair to him, he did need a bit of time to put it back on and do up his laces. And I don't understand why the referee has not given him sufficient time to do that and get into a key role to defend a set piece. So I think Spurs were very harshly done by in that regard. With your Newcastle hat on, could you accept that?
I think it is harsh. but I think it's also quite naive from Tottenham's perspective. So first of all, obviously the referee, there's no rule that says that he has to stop it, but it does feel like, as they were saying at half time, a bit of an unwritten rule that he should just allow it. I don't know why he sort of rushes it at that point, albeit Spence doesn't exactly sprint back from when he finally got his boot back on. He could be a bit sharper. But the naive part to it is why does no one just stand in front of the corner taker while Spence is sorting his boot out, or Spence himself while he's doing it? Just go and wait there so they can't take it. Like, there's little moments like that. I just don't understand why they didn't do that. And then the goal itself, yes, maybe the Spence not being in position, whether he would have been one of the ones marking one of the Fabian Schär or who obviously scored the goal, or the attacking Newcastle players going for that corner, we don't know, to be fair, but maybe he might have been. But even so, it was so easy from a team that's been absolutely terrific from set pieces, both attacking and particularly defending. I think they've got the best record in the Premier League from a defensive point of view set pieces. Obviously, this was a Carabao Cup game, so that won't affect that record. But it felt naive and poor the way they defended that. So I can understand Spurs fans' frustration and Tottenham's frustration, and the players at half time, and Richarlison sort of talking himself into the book. I do have sympathy, and I think Newcastle were a bit lucky in that sense, but also Spurs could have easily have made that situation where it wouldn't have even happened if they had been a bit more savvy about it, is my take.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not going to bang on about it because it's papering over the cracks. And I think we should remember, in terms of defending set pieces, that Spurs tonight were without their two main central defenders, though I do think that Palhinha played extremely well. He's a wonderful player in whatever position. Danso struggled a bit tonight, but it's tough for him. He's come in out of the blue because of the injury to Romero, and he's partnered Van de Ven very well, but tonight suddenly he's partnering somebody else. You've got a different goalkeeper as well. And, let's talk about Kinsky, because a couple of weeks back, after one or two errors, I think it's fair to say, from Vicario, one of the goals at Brighton, and then he seemed to be out of position for the first goal against Aston Villa. There were those saying, "Oh, he's simply not good enough. You've got to drop him, bring in Kinsky." And he actually acquitted himself pretty well, didn't he? When he first came into the side, he was jettisoned into the team during that dramatic part of last season when Fraser Forster, we suddenly realised, couldn't quite cut the mustard, and Vicario was out injured. But obviously the second goal tonight, Tom, the goalkeeper's come flying out. Danso gave the ball away initially anyway, but it was a catalogue of errors. And that's what frustrates me a little bit, because as bad as Spurs were, and, although they sort of created a few opportunities, they were under the cosh a lot, and yet the two goals they've conceded, arguably, are very preventable.
They are. It feels much more like last season, doesn't it? Those two goals than this year. And that is massive credit to Thomas Frank, how quickly he's changed that scenario, that we don't expect those kind of goals to be conceded by Spurs in such a quick turnaround. I mean, that's very impressive. But tonight it was poor. That goal in particular, I put the blame pretty much on Kinsky. Maybe Danso was a bit uncertain, but I think he thinks Kinsky's coming to sort of just clear the ball, and he's just not strong enough, doesn't get the punch right. And Voltemada, who's in fantastic form and has taken to the Premier League like a duck to water, needs no extra sort of extra help for that goal, and he just easily heads it in. And I feel for Kinsky that this was a big opportunity, but it wasn't just that. There was some of his distribution was a bit iffy as well tonight, whether with his hands or his feet. Bear in mind, again, his feet is supposed to be one of his biggest strengths. I'm sure it is, but it is hard. It must be hard for any player, but particularly a goalkeeper, coming in every so often, albeit he's probably been told he'll be the cup goalkeeper, so he would have been expecting it. And to suddenly get a feel for it straight away. So it's not surprising when any kind of player who's sort of a bit rusty isn't quite on the money. Like I think, to be honest, that first game that he played against Liverpool, when he first came in from Slavia Prague, he showed what he can do with his feet. But yeah, it's been a really good week for Vicario. This is probably not a bad game for him either, because those questions that you pointed out there of a few weeks ago, whether Kinsky should get a shout, I don't think any fans are really going to be going on about that now. The only sort of question in hindsight in this match is whether he should have stuck with Vicario for such a tough game up at Newcastle. And just before you get into it, I feel for for Frank on that one, because it's, as I just said, often with backup goalkeepers like Aaron Ramsdale tonight, who made a wonderful save in the second half from Sarr. That's almost like the deal when you sign these backup keepers, as they're effectively, you're going to be my cup keeper. So if you suddenly change that last minute, that's not going to help sort of build trust with the player. But there was a case maybe to be said that Vicario, with the form he's in, could have started this game.
And I found that a really interesting conversation, and I'd love to know what other Spurs fans feel about it, because I totally see why you do need, to play your fringe, your goalkeeper on occasions, and this historically has been a competition. I mean, look what Liverpool. I mean, madness I feel from Slot, bearing in mind how poor their results have been, that he completely changed his team tonight, and they've paid the price for that. And I definitely understand why you want to try and give a few players an opportunity. But when your first choice goalkeeper has been as good as he has been over the past week, and you're going away to Newcastle and you've got an unsettled looking defence anyway, if you really want to win the competition, I sometimes feel you've got to be hard-nosed, Tom. You have got to play your best goalkeeper. And I'm sorry for Kinsky, because he does need an opportunity. But equally, it's very tough for him to come in for a game like that tonight. And I mean, do get in touch with us if you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube. And I know we've got above the 1,000 follower mark on that front, Tom, which is great. Our TikTok account is flying. We
Is
were at
it?
5 on Sunday. We're closing in on 20 today, and don't worry, that's
Heady
becoming an
days.
instant success. Oh, it's heady days. But do get in touch. You can email us as well at the Tottenham Way pod at gmail.com. All sorts of ways. Do let us know what you think about that selection situation, because it's a difficult one, and I wouldn't want to hammer the manager for making that change. I think we all anticipated it. Obviously, he came in and played against Doncaster in the last round, but Doncaster at home, Newcastle away is a slightly different kettle of fish. I just want to ask you about the whole injury situation, and before I do, we had a really good email from football fan _1414, who made reference to comments that I came up with after the Everton game on Sunday night, where I was perhaps a little harsh on Thomas Frank, talking about how he's reluctant to go into too much detail about injured players, doesn't want to give too much away. And I get that. And I think I was a little too firm in criticising him there. And I apologise, because I've made it clear I like the manager. And I know it's difficult when you're talking about injured players. You've got to be a little bit careful. Obviously, as a fan, I really want to know how long before Romero can come back, what is happening with Solanke, etc., etc. But it's a difficult tightrope for a manager to walk, and I don't think he deserved the criticism I gave him on Sunday. So sorry about that. But as a bigger picture, Tom, we just seem to be cursed. Last season, everyone was blaming Ange, and it's his training ground tactics. He's killing the players on the pitch, etc., etc. And here we are again, just heading into November. Gray, the latest casualty. We're in double figures for injuries, and this seems to happen season after season. And I mean, I guess maybe there isn't an explanation for it, and maybe it's part of the bigger picture that we're having stupid tournaments in the summer and it's non-stop, etc. But we seem to get hit year after year. I don't know if you can pinpoint why you think that might be the case this season.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, a lot of them are, injuries that have hung over from last season, aren't they? Maddison, Dragazin, Solanke, but then Solanke's injury happened in pre-season. Again, it sounds like mishitting a ball, which is what happened back in January. That just feels like bad luck, doesn't it? Pape Sarr crashing into Kolo Muani, giving him, a really relatively severe dead leg. Is that not bad luck again? I mean, I don't know. I mean, when it happens so often, I can totally see why you start questioning it. But what Thomas Frank has been not at pains to say, but has been kind of proud of, I suppose, throughout the start of the season when it comes to injuries. And you're right, he's not very forthcoming. I think that's fair to say, but a lot of managers aren't. He doesn't. But it's not fair to say that he's sort of he sort of is mendacious with it. He just doesn't want to offer up anything generally. But one of the things he has said is that the sort of muscle injuries haven't really been the problem. At least that was what he was saying a few weeks ago, which is obviously something that happened regularly under Ange, which Postecoglou very much was pushing back on for being his training methods, because he'd say, look, we're not even training, but it seemed to flare up a lot, and it flared up at his previous clubs as well. So it did seem to be a bit of a pattern. But having said that now, we're not quite sure what Romero's injury is, but I think it's a muscle one. We've got Gray now with a calf, which calf's a muscle, right? So I guess that's that one as well. So there are now a couple that seem to be muscle injuries as well. I mean, you're never going to not have any muscle injuries. So it's just whether you think these are like, more than you should be deserving of. But I think at the moment it's a bit of a perfect storm of you've already got a number of long-term injuries or people coming back from them taking longer than maybe at first hoped, like Dragazin. I mean, look, players always optimistic of their return dates. And I was, led to believe that he was really excited about trying to even make it back for sort of August, September. We're now about to go into November. And Dragazin, to be fair, Frank gave a really positive update about the other day. I don't know if you saw it, but basically he said he is now sort of fully integrated. He's going to play the plan is to play in a friendly during the international break, where Romania probably want to call him up. Frank doesn't think that's a good idea, but he's going to play him in a friendly like he did with Moani, and it feels like he's not far away. But ultimately, it's been 9 months, which is not rare for an ACL. But there's part of me that makes me think if it is going to be 9 months for Maddison, or they're going to go down that route, I'm not sure. I'm starting to wonder whether we're going to see Maddison this season, because of he's already said he doesn't want to rush it because it's a massive moment for him. But it seems like Frank is he wants to be cautious with these long-term injuries. That's a sort of separate point. But I just feel like, there's a lot of these longer-term injuries hanging over, and then they're picking up these other sort of new ones. And now suddenly just look at 10 players out, and it really looks like a sort of a really catastrophic situation like it was last year.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it's deja vu, Tom, and it's just really frustrating. And I think it'll make for another interesting press conference ahead of the Chelsea game. I touched upon the message we got from football fan _1414 on the subject of how Frank is dealing with the questions being asked about him. I'll just read what he said. As to the updates from Thomas Frank on injured players, it's highly unfair to suggest that he is not being honest. Truth is, no one knows the exact time when an injury has healed 100% and when, therefore, the player will be ready to play. No doctor, no coach, no injured player would know this exactly. Hence, Frank is informing openly about the progress. Players now on grass, but still training individually, etc., etc. He simply can't give any more specifics, despite fans and media wanting to know the exact timeline. And he goes on to say, we should praise Thomas Frank for always giving the media a very thorough answer. In fact, sometimes revealing too many details of his thoughts, in my personal opinion. So please don't create a narrative of Frank being dishonest. He is definitely not quite the opposite. No,
I'm not sure.
I had no intention of.
I'm not sure I agree with that last point about him giving too many things away. I think it's fair to say he's not forthcoming at all when it comes to injuries. It's the idea that he's like lying about it But I don't think he is forthcoming about.
I'm sorry,
injuries.
Tom. I was going to agree with you there. I think that he's definitely not being dishonest, but it's a managerial trait. You've got to be careful. You don't want to say the wrong thing and then be proved even more wrong. But there's that little balance sometimes. Just letting the fans have a slightly better idea. With Solanke, because I just don't know. Kulusevski, we don't really have any specifics at the moment. And Romero's the example as well. Of course, they gave him a private jet back after the international matches. And then he picks up the unfortunate injury in the warm-up ahead of the Aston Villa game. And we're kept slightly in the dark. It's frustrating for everybody. And I take what football fan _1414 is saying. I would agree with you that perhaps he's being a little too defensive on behalf of the manager. But it's a difficult one. And just for as long as these injuries persist, Tom, we're just going to get fed up, because it happens, to be honest, season after season after season. And you just start to wonder why.
Well, yeah, and this was the worry a few weeks ago when we were talking about, where Spurs were going, are they going to suddenly kick on? And I was kind of being quite cautious about this, because I knew the fixture, we all knew the fixture list was about to really ramp up regular matches. And if injuries did get worse, which is proving to be the case, the strain on the squad is a lot, isn't it? And I don't know. I mean, we haven't really talked so much about the performance tonight, Marcus. I want to get your thoughts on it, because I'm sure there'll be lots of fans out there who sort of saying it's not creative enough. But I think by now we've sort of realised that for a Newcastle away, no one's going to expect Thomas Frank right now, with the current situation with injuries and being quite early to this team where he's building a defensive base. Hopefully long term he'll bring a bit more sort of spark to it, but I don't think he's naturally the most sort of expansive manager anyway, so it's unlikely at this stage. But were you left, I mean, obviously you've lost, so you're going to be disappointed, but were you left particularly disappointed by the lack of creativity tonight? Or actually, to be fair, they did create some chances, they just didn't take them.
You're absolutely right. They did create some chances. I felt there was a degree of them being too passive for long periods, and we know that. I'll talk about Bentancur, who I really like as a player, but his natural inclination is to, certainly this season, is to get the ball, hold it, almost certainly play it sideways, play it back, whatever. And I just felt that then when they did try to find a raking pass, I mean, unfortunately, the scene was set in, I think it was the 6th minute, and we will come on and talk more about Xavi Simons, but he played that misplaced crossfield pass early on, and you're thinking, oh my goodness me. And I reckon there were 4 or 5 longish balls forward that they were just not good enough. But for all of that, and I'll tell you what, Tom, because I don't want to get angry here, we'll take a short break. And when we come back, I am going to tell you what I do think about Richarlison. Well, unfortunately, I'm starting to think about Brennan Johnson, and I'm intrigued because I've read 1 or 2 little reports already on social media suggesting that Xavi had perhaps his best game in a Spurs shirt. Well, the bar is quite low, but I might still have to beg to differ about that. So a short break, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. Tom, before I talk about Brennan Johnson and Richarlison, I want a neutral opinion from you on Xavi, because we know how much money we paid for him. We know he has found it hard to settle early on. I got the impression that you know, at Everton at the weekend, he was trying too hard, and I actually felt he was just getting into the game in the second half when he was substituted. And tonight I thought, well, give him 90 minutes, whatever. Let's see what he can do. I've mentioned that terrible pass early on. He got bundled off the ball a couple of times. There were some neat little touches, but those people saying that was his best performance in a Spurs shirt, well, if that's the case, it's a representation of how poorly he's played up until now. Did you see anything in his 90-minute display this evening to make you feel that sooner rather than later he is going to start to shine and reproduce the form that a £50 million player should be producing?
Well, there's a few points in there that I agree with, disagree with, agree with. Well, actually, maybe so I agree with actually most other people saying it was his best game, but I also agree that the bar is pretty low, and it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to start lighting it up anytime soon. I just feel like he's not played well so far. I've talked before. I've been quite critical, to be fair, of what I've seen so far, because I think there's a player in there, and we just haven't seen it yet. And you talk about that wayward early pass. When that happened, I thought that was literally what I was talking about the other day, about this carelessness in his play, which seems you'd think would be relatively easy to cut out. But at that moment, you're thinking, come on, here we go again. Another sort of loose pass. It's about time he didn't stop doing it. But that aside, I actually thought he imposed himself in a much better way than he has done so far. Now, it wasn't like anything really to write home about. He didn't really create that much, although he did have that nice layoff for the Sarr shot in the second half, which was a fantastic save by Ramsdale. So could easily had an assist, to be fair. But it was more, I felt like he was getting up to speed with the game a bit more than he has shown so far. There were times when he showed a bit more power on the ball, a little less sort of easy to bundle over, and a bit sharper, a bit quicker. And there was one nice little run forward where he lays in Johnson, and Johnson gets the cross, lays in out wide, and Johnson's cross is absolutely hopeless. And we'll talk about Brennan in a second. but there were little hints that were better for me, a bit more sort of confidence, perhaps, in trying to make things happen. But having said that, there was a moment in the second half which I sort of made a note of, which sort of summed up how he still feels off the pace. So there was a ball through where I forget who passed it to him, and he was just a bit on his heels, and Tonali nips in, and Tonali's an absolutely terrific player. But you forget with Tonali, he's obviously been around for a while. He obviously got banned for ages, but he's had his time to adapt, and it wasn't like he was ripping it up straight away. So it was a bit of a reminder of how far Xavi's still got to go to get up to speed. And yes, we would have hoped he would get up to speed quicker than he has done. And I'm still not going to sort of suggest he's going to go and light it up, anytime, because I haven't seen any real quality moments from him so far. But there were just little hints so far in today's game that suggested it was a bit better, but there's still a long way to go. And that's about as positive as I can be, really. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm expecting, against Chelsea, the team that everyone thought he was going to this summer. And I know we'll come on to Chelsea in a bit as a bit of a preview, but there wasn't anything tonight that made me think, oh, right, he's going to start to sort of make the difference. And I think that kind of comes back to what I was saying about Thomas Frank the other day. How have a bit of sympathy for him in terms of trying to play in a slightly more creative, expansive way. He doesn't. It's not like he doesn't have the players. Xavi Simons might be that player, but he's not that player yet. So it's no wonder he plays a bit more sort of making sure they stay strong defensively, and then a bit more pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's got to keep playing him. We've spent a lot of money, and the only way he's going to improve is minutes on the field. And I can understand, yes, there were a couple of little touches, but we got excited, didn't we? It was the big summer signing, and so far it's been very underwhelming. And as you rightly say, he was linked with Chelsea in the summer. We've got Chelsea at home at the weekend, and we'll come on to that in just a moment. But there are a couple of other players we need to run the rule over.
Marcus,
Go on, yeah, sorry.
Just one final point. Just you saying you got excited. I mean, I remember when he signed, I was at Hotspur Way, and we were waiting for it to go through because we were there for a press conference, which you may remember got pushed back by about an hour and a half. And I think it was due to, we didn't know, it never got officially sort of confirmed it was due to Xavi's signing. But Frank, when he finally came in for his press conference, was absolutely buzzing. You could just tell how happy and what a kind of positive mood he was in. So I got the sense, just from that body language and the way he was, how much he was excited to have this player at his disposal. And I'm sure he still is, but it's just taking far longer than I think a lot of fans sort of hoped.
It's interesting, though. It's often with a player, it's first impressions, and I'm not trying to be clever, and hopefully I'm going to be proved totally wrong. But you may remember back in pre-season, I was in Poland, and I watched the whole of the Poland Netherlands match, and he was kind of non-existent that night, and I thought, okay, but that's just one game. And there are plenty of examples of players who take 4, 5, 6 months to adapt. And I really, really want to believe that he's going to be one of those, and that maybe inch by inch, bit by bit, we'll start to see more, and his confidence will start to flow. And at least, touch wood, he stays fit, which is something that most of the other players are unable to do. Now, Richarlison, Tom, and I'm sorry, he's a Spurs player, and I like him. And I know he's had battles off the field, and I know he's had injury problems on them. And of course, bizarrely, is it coincidentally? I don't know. The fact that he has stayed fit for the first 2 months of this season, so we've seen plenty of him. And I'm afraid to say that after tonight, I have seen enough of him. I'm afraid he's not good enough to play for Tottenham Hotspur. He seems to lack technique. He offers very little. His control of the ball is not great. I remember being so impressed with him against PSG in the Super Cup, where he was holding everything up superbly. I thought, wow, he's fit now, he's sharp. That's a really important aspect in the way he plays. Well, he's not doing that. And he's meant to be really good in the air. He gets a couple of headers in. They're always tame headers, straight at the goalkeeper. And he just looks clumsy to me. And I'm afraid every time the ball goes forward, I'm thinking, right, who's in the box? Who's going to do this? And of course, you're thinking, well, it has to be Richarlison. He's our centre forward. He's not capable of it. And I was a little disappointed that Thomas Frank didn't make a substitution at half time. Look, we know these games go straight to penalties, so it was only going to be 90 minutes. I wanted Kolo Muani to be given a full 45 minutes in the second half because Richarlison simply was not contributing. And I hate to be harsh about him because, he desperately wants to do well. But, this is our club and we've only got so long to cheer it on. I'm afraid he's not good enough. Am I being too harsh?
I don't know. It's just there's just an irony about it, isn't there? That you're saying he's not capable, and then you talk about how he played in the PSG game, or you think of the goal he scored against Burnley. I mean, like, he is capable. That's the frustrating thing with him. He has shown matches.
Well, not on a consistent
Oh,
basis, at least.
and there's the rub. There's the difference, and nowhere near enough on a consistent basis. He's had a good run at the start of this season, and there have been lots of games where if he's not been anonymous, and he wasn't. The thing is, he wasn't anonymous tonight. He had actually quite a lot of chances. None of them were really, gilt-edged chances, apart from that cutback from Bergvall where he ended up sort of overrunning it, and just sort of got his sort of awareness and sort of positioning all wrong, because that felt like an easy tap in, but he was just sort of in front of the ball and it didn't. He couldn't get onto it. But the headers you talk about, there was sort of like three of them. None of them are like definitely you should score this, but with his prowess in the air, which you're now sort of decrying, but I remember the Marseille game. That sort of sums up Richarlison, doesn't it? We know he can do it. There is evidence that he can score headers like that. Difficult ones that other players just can't, and that's what leads you to how frustrating it can be. I mean, one thing I sort of, as you were talking about him and his injury past and how he stayed fit at the moment, I'm not saying I've sort of noticed this, but I just wondered, maybe you had. Yes, he's staying fit at the moment, and Frank's talked about how he feels like they've done well as a sort of medical and managerial team to make sure he stays fit. But is he playing within himself a bit now at this stage of his career for fear that he will get injured? I mean, remember the time when he came off the bench shortly after coming back from injury? I don't know if it was Ange's first season or second season. He cuts the ball back off the left, where I like him probably most anyway, for the Solanke goal, and does his hamstring in the process of setting it up. And then he's out again, and he looks so frustrated, and you really felt for him. But I wonder, those kind of lung-busting runs, is he still capable of that kind of thing anymore? Or maybe he is, but he's questioning himself, and that's sort of removing a bit of an edge from his game. And then he has that capacity just to get embroiled in little spats and go down a little bit too easy. I mean, I know a lot of his job as a centre forward's job is to win free kicks and go down a bit easily sometimes to try and win those free kicks. And he does a job for the team at times, but sometimes it feels like there are some games where that's all he does. So I totally see where you're coming from. And I've said for the last few pods now, I think we've seen enough of a sample size to declare that he's not the striker that you hang your hat on as your number one. But unfortunately, Dominic Solanke's injured.
I think you made two good points there, by the way. He's definitely better, I think, out wide. And there was genuine threat when he was fit, playing in that position on a more regular basis. And I think that there could well be something to you suggesting that he's slightly playing within himself because he is afraid of injury. But the bottom line is, and it's really tough for him, it's tough for any Spurs striker that comes in now, because we all, even if we don't mean to, going to make comparisons with Harry Kane. And I'm sitting there tonight going, oh, if Kane was there, he'd have done this, that and the other. Well, there is only one Harry Kane, so that is harsh. But I just feel that, unfortunately, no matter what sort of a fine move Tottenham put together, I never expect it to be finished off, which in the good old days, the days of Harry Kane and Son and other strikers before that, was not the case. But we just look absolutely toothless in front of goal. And I'm afraid that Brennan Johnson's contribution isn't really helping. And I've been a fan of Johnson. Tom, I mean, he's scored a lot of goals since coming to the club. We know he has the ability to make a really decisive contribution. But after a while, you've got to say, well, at least I've got to say to myself, what actually is he doing, both when in possession, but also perhaps just as importantly, when out of possession, because I think he's a spare part in that instance. And I know this is a cup game at Newcastle, and I made it clear beforehand, there was an interesting conversation going around, which game as a Spurs fan would you rather win, Newcastle tonight or Chelsea on Saturday? I would much rather have won tonight's game because I've got that taste for silverware. I want us to be in the quarterfinals of the League Cup. I know there are some big teams still in the competition, but we could get a few players back before the next round. And who knows, you get through a quarterfinal, you've got a two-legged semi-final, suddenly Wembley's around the corner. And frankly, whatever happens against Chelsea at the weekend, and history tells you we're going to lose anyway, because even when we're playing well and they're playing badly, come that bloody game, they always turn us over. But, you know, even if we lost at the weekend, it's not necessarily a disaster. The way teams are losing left, right and centre, you can lose games. I mean, look at Chelsea. They've lost their last couple of games at home. And even tonight, I mean, they've rolled a dice and come through 4-3 and had another red card. It's one league game. I'd much rather have won tonight. And so I am frustrated, and I'm going to start lashing out a little bit. But when you mentioned the move, actually, when I think, did you say it was Xavi who laid the ball off to Brennan Johnson in a good position? He shanked it. I don't know what he was trying to do. That's the worst thing. I honestly don't know what he was trying to do, but he put the ball out of play. And I find it hard, really, to remember any significant contributions he has made of late.
Well, I think when you were talking about how you felt that Spurs just aren't going to finish off their chances at the moment, I thought that was going to be a neat segue into Brennan Johnson, because that's what he did last season, wasn't he? That's he was the finisher, out wide right. And I said after Ange left that I felt like it was a bad move for Brennan, because I don't think there's ever going to be a system that's going to suit him more than the one that Ange played, because, as we've consistently said, he's not technically brilliant. He's not brilliant on the ball. There's a reason why that cross was particularly poor. Actually, he had another cross later on which was better, but he's obviously not David Beckham with the delivery. He's not anywhere near to it. He's much better being the tap-in finisher at the far post or running through on goal. But I don't think the way Spurs are playing at the moment under Frank is helping Brennan Johnson. I don't think he's really getting those opportunities to show what he is good at. If anything, it's just showing all the things he's not so good at. And I feel for him a bit, because I imagine he's thinking, I was top scorer last season, I was the hero in the final. Not that I'm sure he's getting ahead of himself, but he's wondering where he fits into this system. And it's ironic, because Brennan Johnson was a player that Thomas Frank wanted to sign for Brentford. So who knows how he was going to use him there. But right now, and it's a long season, and as injuries pile up, I'm sure Frank has a bit of a, Tinkerman, sort of in the positive sense of tactics and moving things around, may find a place for him where it works. But right now, I don't think there's been anything that he's stumbled upon yet that has worked for Brennan Johnson. He tried at Everton, where he basically played Kudus and Johnson outright, and Kudus was kind of coming in at number 10 quite a lot. We saw it earlier in the season where he played wide left, didn't really work, even though he actually scored a couple of goals. And then tonight, with the way they played, he was anonymous, wasn't he? And he didn't play particularly well either when he did get any kind of possession of the ball. So I'm a bit at a loss to know where Brennan Johnson fits in the Thomas Frank sort of era at Spurs right now. And maybe that's a bit dramatic. Things can change. But it's actually probably quite a talking point to ask Thomas maybe on Friday. Where do you see, the hero of last season fitting in? I know I say hero, he's a bit of a divisive figure, isn't he, still amongst the Spurs fan base? Because even last season, Johnson again, ole, scoring the winner, 18 goals. There were still people who don't actually rate him that much as a footballer for the kind of the reasons I've just pointed out about his technical ability. And now the way it's going, I've got Spurs sporting friends who are very much criticising his performance tonight. And I'm not sure quite where he's going to fit in. But look, like I said before, Frank might find a way. It's just not happening at the moment, is it?
Yeah, it isn't. And the thing he did well last season was that he kept popping up and scoring goals. And you can get away with a lot if you do that, because obviously it's the most important thing. But now it's not happening. And although you say, well, he might find a way, I think what we have to appreciate here, and I know in the international break we all said, it's 8 out of 10 so far for Thomas Frank, but we were aware of these fixtures coming up. I do think what we have to bear in mind is that Frank is looking at these players, looking closely at them, trying to work out whether they can fit into his system. And if not, and that's why you've got to give the guy 1 or 2 transfer windows at least. And we're all so impatient these days. Unless a manager is having an absolute shocker, which Thomas Frank clearly isn't, he's here for the long haul. Everything he does, as he says at the start of our podcast, is for the long term. And it will take him time. And then I think he's going to be ruthless. You boys have mentioned that as charming and affable as he is, there's a ruthless side to him. There has to be, to any Premier League manager. And I think that, some players will simply have to go, and he will hopefully bring in two or three in place of them who will fit more into his system. And it's not necessarily a damning indictment of Brennan Johnson if he doesn't fit into the Thomas Frank system. You work for some managers, you don't work for others. But it's just been an ongoing process with regards to him, and it's an important role. So, yeah, I'm afraid I've lost patience with Brennan. I've lost patience with Richarlison. I'm prepared, of course, to hold on with Xavi, because you don't just flog a £50 million player after a couple of months. But we go ahead now, Tom, to Chelsea on Saturday, and unfortunately. Well, I do remember when we played quite well when Graham Potter was their manager, and we beat them. I'm trying to think who scored that day. Oh God! Anyway, he's not at the club anymore. It's one of our homegrown heroes who's disappeared ever since. And but every time I go to Spurs Chelsea, and thank God, actually I can't go on Saturday. It's disappointing. They've been calling it three-point lane for donkey's years. They seem to be a bit better away from home as well, and of course we're not so good at home. This has got the recipe for a disaster on Saturday, hasn't it?
When you frame it like that, it does. Yeah, just Chelsea always seem to have the measure of Spurs, don't they? I mean, even last season when Spurs went 2-0 up early doors, and then Romero got injured. When Romero and Van der Ven came back. But I think even before Romero got injured, I think most Spurs fans were thinking, 2-0 is not enough. And so it proved to be.
No.
Obviously, that was during the Ange days where there were some wild games, particularly against Chelsea. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this might be a super pragmatic approach, this game, for Frank, even more so against Chelsea, to sort of counter that, hopefully. And I think maybe Spurs fans might appreciate that a bit more. Although, having said that, if they do play very defensively and then they concede in like the 60th minute and end up losing 1-0, then actually there might be a bit more pressure than if they had gone for it. I don't know. It's a tough one. One thing, one thing I wanted to ask you about was when you were talking about Brennan a second ago, was Sonny. Have you ever at any moment this season sort of thought, oh, we're missing him? But I'm not saying that you would think that. I'm not sure I've really heard that. And I know he's sort of ripping up in the MLS because but that, obviously it's a different intensity and it's a different quality of league. So, but I don't know, like when you look at wide left, maybe it's not missing Sonny, it's missing just a better player out wide left. That he wasn't the answer because of the stage he got in his career. But I don't know, or maybe is there anything about in that at all, or have you just sort of moved on from him completely on that front?
No, I haven't. I'm actually getting distracted now because it's really annoying me that I can't remember, and I'm just going to try and find out who scored those goals against Chelsea when we beat them. Oliver Skipp, of course, Oliver Skipp.
Yes.
Early in the second half, and then surprise, surprise, Harry Kane got the second. Yeah, of course, I'm missing Sonny and Kane all the time because we are so, I keep using the same adjective, but so toothless. And I know last season I got angry because people were slagging off Sonny and saying, oh, he's finished all the rest of it. I thought he was lacking a bit of confidence and maybe he'd lost half a yard. But how can we ever forget some of those brilliant runs, cutting in from the left, shimmering past a couple of players and seeing the top of the net bulge? Absolutely. There was just a bit of, oomph, dynamic. And I kind of feel that that's the main thing that we're missing at the moment. Even Kudus, who I love to bits, he looked quite angry, I thought, when he came on tonight. But, he's got immense skill, but he kind of never actually burst down and like, he can get there and they'll cut back inside and he'll beat a couple of players and they'll send in a good ball. A great player, but not that just pure dynamism that I love, whether it's a fullback. And by the way, that's why I thought Jed Spence was really good tonight. He did everything he could trying to get forward. And Porro, listen, his deliveries the other night were great. He's a little bit up and down, and I feel a bit for him because he plays every single minute, it seems to me. And fair play to him, he never gets injured either. but he's not always entirely reliable with what he's trying to do. But for me, I just want that dynamism that is missing. So of course, someone like Son is going to be bemoaned. But I think you're right about Saturday. It's a really difficult one tactically for Frank, because if he does go gung ho, I think they'll pick us off. And equally, if we try and be cautious and play effectively as we have in all our home games this season against the likes of Bournemouth and Wolves and Aston Villa, we know what might happen there, which is why I fear, and I hate to be the prophet of doom, I often am, but that's why I do think it is a recipe for disaster.
Maybe, but actually thinking about Chelsea's last game at home to Sunderland, they conceded a set piece and they conceded on the counter. And I know, Spurs obviously struggled tonight with the goal they conceded, but they've been brilliant set pieces generally. So that bodes well, particularly to a quite injury hit defence of Chelsea's perspective at the moment. Delap got sent off tonight, even though he's just come back. I don't know if that rules him out of the game against Spurs. And obviously Cole Palmer, who such a thorn in Spurs' side, is still injured. So there are reasons to be optimistic. I suppose we should bring it back to Xavi, because he's one of the. Well, we should bring it back to Xavi because.
No, I'm sorry. I'm only smiling here, Tom, because as a Spurs fan of many years standing, I can seldom see any reason to be optimistic going into a Chelsea game. Okay. That's me being stupid and ridiculous. Come back to Xavi.
Let me phrase it differently. There are reasons to be less pessimistic than you probably would be. But no, Xavi Simons is probably one of the talking points. Again, he just constantly is at the moment. Would you start him, I guess, going into Chelsea? So just a bit of context, if everyone doesn't know at this stage, throughout the whole summer, he was linked to Chelsea the whole time. Everyone thought he was going to go to Chelsea for most of the summer from RB Leipzig. And at the end, Spurs made a move for him and got him. And in the end, it didn't look like Chelsea actually were ever going to properly make a move for him. So he ends up at Spurs. As we mentioned earlier, Frank seemed very happy, and fans, felt like he was the number 10 that they've been waiting for after missing out on Gibbs White and Eze. And then, as we mentioned earlier, he's not quite lived up to it yet. But going into this game, with the way where you want to set up, do you want him starting, and where would you want him starting at number 10, or do you want him starting out wide left?
Well, again, I'm not entirely sure who's fit for Saturday, Tom. I mean, I kind of he wants to play this number 10 role, and I think therefore we want to try and give him the best opportunity to succeed. But now, I mean, is Odobert out? I don't know what the situation is with him. You kind of fear after a night like tonight, we'll suddenly discover that two more players have gone down as well. So I think it could be a case of needs must. I want Xavi to have the opportunity to show Chelsea, you missed out big time in the summer. So give him his best role if that's what he wants. Let's try and build around him if we possibly can. But because the options are so limited, and because... And I do understand why Frank keeps going with Polina and Bentancur. They're reliable, they're fit, they are a team to an extent, and I can imagine him wanting to use that team against Chelsea at the weekend, and that therefore does limit what else can happen. You see, I like Bergvall. I thought Bergvall was pretty lively, did what he could to get involved tonight. We've all been upset that Sarr hasn't had enough minutes of late, and he might have scored a very good goal this evening. So it's difficult. Do you pander to Xavi because he's your big expensive signing, you want to get the best out of him, or do you have a look and think, well, hang on a minute, actually, based on current form, X is better or Y is better? And that's why Thomas Frank's earning a lot of money, and he's either going to get a lot of plaudits on Saturday night or more likely a lot of criticism. I don't know. What's your gut feeling? What do you think he should do with the team on Saturday?
I mean, you put it about Odobert. I hadn't actually noticed that he wasn't on the bench today. I think he was on the bench the other day and didn't play. So that would suggest some sort of injury issue or something else is going on. I don't know whether the guys who were at the game might have got some answers afterwards in the press conference, or it's something for Friday. But if we presume that he's not available, then the back four picks itself, presuming Van der Ven is just being wrapped in cotton wool tonight. So Spencer left back, because Udogie I don't think will be fit. I mean, Udogie, Solanke and Romero, he said ahead of this game that they were taking another step forward and were on the grass. He was, again, pretty vague about it. So I didn't really get the sense that they'd be ready for this match, but let's see. Let's just presume they're not. Then I guess it'll definitely be Paulinho and Bentancur if he can have it in the two. Kudus wide right, obviously. Probably Muani, based on Richarlison's performance tonight up front. And then I think it will probably be Xavi out left, and then maybe Bergvall starting at number 10, particularly if Odebear's injured. There actually aren't as many selection headaches, really, if those three big hitters aren't fit, like we don't expect them to be at this point.
Just before we finish, and I think this clarifies why I have no hope for the weekend. I've just looked at the recent games, but I say the recent, I mean, basically you can go back to the 1980s, but since 2019, Tom, last season, these home games against Chelsea, we lost 3-4, of course, having been 2-0 up. Season before that was the famous 4-1, where it all started to unravel a little bit. Season before that was the great triumph when Skip and Kane scored in a 2-0 win. That's the aberration. The year before that, we lost 1-0 at home. In fact, we also played them in... Sorry, that was a League Cup game. We lost 1-0 at home. And in the Premier League, we lost 3-0 at home. Year before that, we lost 1-0. We also played them in the League Cup. Actually, I think we beat them on penalties, didn't we, in September 2020? That was a 1-1 draw. Bottom line is, they don't lose. They don't. Even when they're rubbish, unless they're really rubbish under Graham Potter, they don't lose. And that's why I'm fearing things. And that's why, Tom, and I was intrigued, a lot of the other fans tonight, I was having a little chat, go, oh no, I'd much rather beat Chelsea at the weekend, don't really care about it tonight. No, for me, Tom, as a Spurs fan, this is another little dagger in my heart. It's another season that has gone by that we are not going to win the League Cup. And I just want silverware. And, you know, you've only got 2 domestic chances. And who knows, we might go and draw Arsenal away in the 3rd round of the FA Cup. For me, these cup competitions are priceless. League games are important, but there are 38 of them. You can lose several that you think are critical and still come through. But tonight, we have lost an opportunity to move a step closer to Wembley. We've also lost away from home for the first time. Okay, it's in the cup, not the league, but we've lost a little bit of invincibility. And I just worry a little bit, being a pessimist, Tom, now that, you know, if we'd won this match, you'd go into the Chelsea game feeling great. You're 3rd in the league. You're in the quarterfinals of the League Cup. You're doing okay in the Champions League. But now we're out of one domestic competition. We've got a horrendous set of fixtures coming up in the league, and I'm just a bit worried. I wonder, when we look back at the season as a whole in 6 or 7 months, will we say, well, it was that wet night in Newcastle that proved to be the beginning of the end? Please tell me I'm wrong, that I'm being too pessimistic.
Yeah, you're being too pessimistic, Marcus.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I wanted to hear. And you can go and crow. Have you? Not that I care. Any idea who your boys have got in the quarterfinals of the cup? Has the draw been made? Do we care?
I'm no one on this podcast will care apart from me.
No.
So
I think we'll only care hopefully if you've got Arsenal away. That's sort of bearable.
I'll have to go and check. I think you should wrap it up, and we'll. Oh, here we go. Newcastle host Fulham, so that's nice. It's a nice easy draw.
Oh, actually, it makes it worse. It makes it worse. Okay, well, listen, Tom, thank you very much indeed. We love people to get in touch with us, don't we? YouTube, TikTok. Do email us. I mentioned the email earlier, Tottenham Way podcast @gmail.com. I mean, you're the expert here. There are so many ways people can now get after us, or hopefully compliment us.
You can. So YouTube, well, if you're watching this, you'll already know. It's at the Tottenham Way on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio podcast, we're obviously wherever you get your podcasts. It's the Tottenham Way pod @gmail.com, Marcus, for the email. And then we're
I was looking for that. I couldn't find it.
Tottenham Way on X, TikTok, and Instagram as well.
Tom, thank you. I feel like you've actually given me a little bit of therapy. I've got a few things off my chest tonight. Hopefully, well, no, I have been a bit despondent, but things change. 3 nights ago, I'm on top of the world. And if I'm proved wrong, and I so sincerely hope I am, when we beat Chelsea at the weekend, we can all smile once more. But tonight belongs to Newcastle. The future is Tottenham's. Though I am Marcus Buckland, he is Tom Barkley. Come on, you Spurs.